At the tip of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, in a region called the Riviera Maya, lies Tulum, a rare archaeological site facing the sea. The coastal city of Tulum was a fortress of merchants whose foundation dates back to the year 564, according to inscriptions. But most of the vestiges date back to the late post-classic period in the 13th century AD. Tulum is a Mayan word for fence, which is easily understandable given the massive protective walls that surround the city. The fortifications surround the main sector of the ancient city on three sides, which includes most of the city's monumental architecture, its temples, altars, tombs, and buildings of the city's leaders. The Temple of Frescoes is the most interesting and the best preserved. The facade displays a double molding decked with rosettes, human figures, and intertwined spirals. According to the archaeologists, they represent supernatural beings who lived in the underworld and who, according to legend, favored agriculture and vegetative growth. These frescoes, painted blue and white, constitute one of the most important pictorial depictions of the Mayan period. The Castillo is the site's most impressive building. It is seen overlooking the Caribbean Sea. The top of the building includes 2 rooms and 3 openings supported by 2 columns in the shape of a snake. It was built on an old temple which has served since as a substructure. The side that faces the sea is entirely protected. Further away, the temple of the descending god is made up of a small platform on which a one-room temple was built. It displays personifications of the rain god, the sun god, and the moon goddess. The Palacio is the house of the great lord. Located on the main road of Tulum, its main facade displays a portico with 6 entrances formed by 4 columns. The edifice has a total of 13 entrances, and it is the biggest building in the city. The main entrance to the House of Columns is also made up of 4 columns that supported the roof. A divinity is represented on a wall. Because Tulum was built on the highest peak along the coast, and because of its network of defensive walls, the city was a privileged site for the exploitation of maritime resources and for trade and commerce with other Mayan cities. Including Coban, located 40 kilometers from here. It is the greatest site in the Yucatan Peninsula. It stretched out over 70 square kilometers, and at its peak, the city had a population of 50,000. The city was occupied as early as the 1st century BC, as revealed by traces of low platforms and constructions made of wood and palm. However, most of the city's monuments were built in the classic period of Mayan civilization, between 500 and 900 AD. The Coban site is divided into different areas that are linked by stone paths. The first area displays a 25-meter-high temple, as well as a ball court which is easily identifiable with its hoops through which the ball had to pass. Representations of prisoners are engraved on the walls. More than 30 limestone steels, altars, and panels representing dignitaries have been discovered on the site. They date back to the 7th century. A complex of modest-sized buildings is quite remarkable, for it regroups the most recent monuments of Coban, built during the early post-classic period, in the 14th century. Named the Paintings Group, its name alludes to the fragments of frescoes seen on the main temple. This temple and its annex buildings were made with the materials and dressed stones of older temples. The temple of the Nohokmul group stands atop one of the highest pyramids of the region. In Maya, Nohokmul means large hill. The pyramid was built in the Classic period around the 5th century, most likely to celebrate the holy power of Coba's dignitaries and to serve as the last residence for the members of the ruling families. The temple's peak was built 800 years later. The Makanhok group is made up of low platforms with small temples and altars. Steels commemorating events that affected the members of Coba's ruling class, which included some women, are seen here. It is believed that this site was devoted to funerary ceremonies. After the year 1000, the city lost its political importance, but seems to have retained its symbolic and religious power, which enabled it to flourish again between 1200 and 1500, until the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors. Located in a forest, the site of Coba has a wild and untamed atmosphere, which truly gives the visitor the feeling of being an explorer.
Located 30 kilometers north of Paris, Royaumont Abbey was founded in 1228 by King Saint Louis. Built in less than 10 years and richly endowed by the Kingdom of France, it knew great prestige in the 13th century. More than 100 monks lived here in work and prayer, in addition to the lay brothers who ensured the connection between religious and civil life. After the French Revolution in 1789, the abbey was transformed into a cotton mill and the church was dismantled in order to reuse its stones. From the vestiges of this lost church, you can imagine the huge monumental structure that was compared to a cathedral. It's likely that it was used for great ceremonies connected to the worship of relics or major pilgrimages. The only element of it that remains is this tower, that owes its solidity to the interior spiral staircase that gives it a kind of spinal column. They used 200 oxen harnessed to the columns of the church to destabilize the building and bring it down. A few of the remaining stones have been arranged so that visitors can have a hint of the former structure that adjoined the cloister. Along with the church, the cloister constitutes the real center of monastic life. The cloister at Royaumont Abbey is one of the most vast in France. It's a full square, with each side measuring about 50 meters. The other monastic buildings hinge around this point. The church, of course, as well as the monks' building, the former refectory and the former kitchen. The 4 galleries that surround the garden are composed of 9 bays each, with beautiful ribbed vaults. It was a place used for moving between the buildings, which were all sealed off from each other, but also a place for wandering, meditation, and reading. Listed as a historic monument, this very beautiful garden in the Abbey's cloister was restored in the early 20th century. Lacking any records of the ancient garden, it was remade as a French formal garden, a neoclassical style typical of the Renaissance, with flower beds and geometric bushes. The water in the center brings together the 4 sections that are a reference to the rivers of paradise. Monastic life was heavily regulated. While the times of prayer naturally punctuated the day, the times for sleeping, waking up, and eating were also set by the rule. 1 meal per day was served in the refectory, and meat was forbidden in the dishes. The monks' refectory has lovely architecture. Very fine, very slender, with large monolithic columns. The meals were held in silence, during which a lector would read holy text from the pulpit. The floor was recreated with a multicolored tiling inspired by the 13th century, made by hand. Adjoining the choir monks' refectory, the kitchen, on the other hand, has a low vault supported by 4 massive pillars that have capitals decorated with vegetal patterns. In a niche, there is a nursing virgin from the 14th century, which has been baptized the Virgin of Royaumont. This kitchen was centrally located with several chimneys, and it had to serve nearly 250 meals a day. Because while there were around 100 choir monks here, there were just as many lay brothers who ensured the connection between monastic life and the exterior world. The lay brothers had their own refectory. These monks did not take the same vows as the choir monks. They were able to go outside, and they dealt with things like agricultural work and the exploitation of forests, mills, and fisheries. This was a subsistence activity, but also something for the development and improvement of the Abbey. The Gothic architecture here is also very sober and strict, a style that is characteristic of the Cistercians. Next, on the west side, there were more functional buildings, like the latrines, for example. It's a structure that was built above a canal. To understand this building, you have to know that the Cistercian rule was very strict. The monks all woke up at the same time, all prayed at the same time, all ate at the same time, and they all went to the bathroom at the same time as well. Thus, the large number of latrines, 32, that overhang the canal, which passes through the ground floor just below. After its high point in the 13th century, the Abbey went into decline. The 100 Years' War and famines and plundering gradually emptied out the site, leading up to the French Revolution when the church was demolished. In the 19th century, the Abbey was even turned into a cotton mill, and water wheels were installed in the canals to produce the energy needed for the machines. The cotton mill went bankrupt, and finally in 1905 the Abbey was sold to the rich industrialists of the Coban family. After having lived there, then having put the site at the disposal of the Red Cross during World War I, one of its descendants, Henri, decided to open the doors of Royaumont to artists and intellectuals. This was the creation of the Royaumont Foundation. Thanks to him and his spouse, the Abbey has now become a major internationally renowned centre of meetings and exchanges for several generations of artists and intellectuals in the fields of the human sciences, music and dance. After having been a Cistercian abbey with its golden age during the time of King St. Louis, and then traversing 800 years of French history for better or worse, Royaumont Abbey is now an internationally renowned cultural centre. Each year, more than 300 musicians and dancers, selected according to strict criteria of excellence, come here to perfect their skills alongside teachers, who are known as much for their artistic qualities as their abilities to transmit ideas and to inspire. Inspiration being by default the primary vocation of this site, where the soul was elevated for the good of humanity.
150 kilometers north of Madurai, on the Kolidam River, it is time for ablutions for the Hindus of the city of Trichy. The geological characteristic of this city is its monolithic block of rock, 83 meters high. A steep staircase enables its ascent, and it offers a fantastic view of the city, which is another great megalopolis of the state of Tamil Nadu, numbering over 1 million residents. At the rock's peak, a temple is devoted to Ganesh. The city contains many important monuments, including baths and a Christian church. But the most famous is undoubtedly Srirangam Temple, the biggest temple of India. This Hindu temple is devoted to Vishnu. The entrance tower rises 72 meters high with 11 stories that become progressively smaller as they near the peak. There are 21 gopurams laid out over the 7 enclosures which surround the temple, all richly decorated. At the entrance, religious beggars invoke the gods while making offerings. Here too, many stands selling food or flowers occupy the first 2 of the 7 zones delineated by the 7 enclosures. Above one of the entrances, a relief displays one of the forms of Vishnu resting peacefully. On one side, an elephant serves as a reminder that Ganesh, the son of Shiva, is the god of knowledge and intelligence. The temple occupies a surface of more than 6 hectares, which makes it the biggest functioning Hindu temple in the world. One of the gopurams was never painted. One can imagine the work required to decorate such a building. Besides the 21 towers, the religious complex includes 39 pavilions, 50 sanctuaries, and a formidable hall of 1,000 pillars, which actually number 953. It was built in the 15th century on the site of the former temple. The pillars are decorated with sculptures of soldiers on horseback trampling demons. Millions of pilgrims are welcomed here throughout the year. Every day, 200 of them are fed for free thanks to offerings and donations. These donations also serve to maintain the temple. In this labyrinthine temple, everyone can find an idol or a god to turn to. There is a never-ending dance between the halls and corridors with their finely worked pilasters topped by sculpted capitals and colorful ceilings. The complex shelters sanctuaries in dozens of Vishnu's various forms. Believers make offerings and wishes in front of them. The more enclosures you penetrate, the more sacred the site. And the holiest of the holy is open only on rare occasions. The entrance is guarded by sculptures placed in the niches of 3 of the sanctuary's walls. The origins of the temple are said to date back to the beginning of the AD era, but it represents the architectural developments that took place throughout the 2 millennia, up until the 19th century. Its wide range of purposes and cults was developed throughout the centuries, with the contributions of various leaders and dynasties, all captivated by the site's beauty and serenity. Not far from here, also located on one of the river's islands, Thiruvanaikaval Temple is devoted to Shiva. It has 5 concentric walls and 7 gopurams. The one at the main entrance includes idols on its 7 stories. Legend has it that Shiva himself helped the workers as they constructed the exterior surrounding wall. In Hindu religion, elephants are sacred. Domesticated and decorated in the colors of the gods, in some temples they bless the faithful with their trunks in exchange for some coins. It is the most popular Hindu god, son of Shiva, god of the cosmos. In southern India, this temple is one of the 5 great temples of Shiva that represent the 5 elements: earth, air, fire, water, and space. This one represents water. A Chola king from the great dynasty of southern India had it built in the 1st century BC. This temple reflects the human body, and the idol of Shiva is considered its soul. There are many interesting legends about this temple. During the construction of the 5th wall, the king did not have money to pay his workers. He then dreamt that Shiva ordered him to continue the works. Not knowing what to do, a saint came and gave a pinch of ash to each mason. The ash then turned into gold powder, and the king realized that the saint was the god himself. Since then, this wall is the most sacred one. Today it generates great devotion from believers in southern India. Around this temple, many artisans create idols for visiting pilgrims. Here, a blacksmith molds bronze statuettes in the image of the venerated god. Death Valley National Park is located east of the Sierra Nevada in both California and Nevada. With over 13,600 square kilometers, this arid zone is the greatest American national park outside of Alaska. Flanked by the Panamint and Amargosa mountain ranges, Death Valley contained, some 10,000 years ago, a great lake that covered nearly the entire valley. After the glacial period, the lake disappeared through evaporation, for the area is protected by the mountains and it rarely rains here. In the midst of the valley, a surprising green spot surfaces in this desert landscape, Furnace Creek. Furnace Creek is a required point of passage for those who want to explore the valley. There are also remnants from the time of borax mining. Borax was used to create glass and in metalworks. The remnants are fossilized in the sand because Furnace Creek is among the hottest places on Earth. The temperature is often above 50 degrees Celsius. There are also traces of the first discoverers of Death Valley in 1849. This group of pioneers advanced into the desert without knowing its traps and risks. They had to abandon their 25 carts and sacrifice their horses to survive. But times have changed, and so have modes of transport. Topographically, Death Valley contains the greatest range of altitudes in the continental United States. The bottom of the valley, at 85.5 meters below sea level, runs alongside mountains that stretch up to 4,000 meters. Dunes cover only 1% of Death Valley's surface area. dunes cover only 1% of Death Valley's surface area. They are nevertheless famous because the film industry has used them for numerous movies, like the Star Wars series. And while the height of the sand reaches 40 meters on average, some dunes reach up to 200 meters. Zabriskie Point offers a spectacular view over a series of hills and ravines with changing colors. It is an ancient lake formed nearly 9 million years ago. Over the course of the lake's existence, the sediment, in the form of a saline solution of mud, gravel, and ash from the volcanic era, amassed in the bottom. A few million years later, as it evaporated, the lake's water left behind a thick sediment made up of borax and brine. Today, its surface is entirely scarified by rills, which are narrow and shallow incisions created by the erosion of water runoff. Under certain conditions, they can even form a hydrographic network by creating a ravine, a stream, or even a river. Not far from here, in the Badlands, the site of Artist Palette bears its name well. The erosion, which undermined the different rocks and sediments, reveals a palette of colors that depicts the diversity of materials and the oxidation of the metals they contain. The reds, pinks, and yellow originate from iron salts, the greens are a decomposition of mica, and the violets originate from manganese. Ascending the Black Mountains, you discover a magnificent panorama in the central part of Death Valley. From the peak, topping out at 1,676 meters above sea level, you can see the Badwater Basin, the lowest point in the entire United States. The Badwater Plain is undoubtedly the most inhospitable spot in the United States. Formerly the bottom of a salt lake, it is located at 86 meters below sea level. The site also holds the world record for high temperatures, with 56.7 degrees Celsius noted on July 13, 1913. The Devil's Golf Course is also aptly named. It is an area of salted mud. Lumps developed where the salt became crystallized, therefore forming sharp shapes. This formation is pretty recent on a geological scale. Indeed, it was created by the lake's evaporation, which occurred at the beginning of our era. In the valley's northwest side, Mosaic Canyon is a small canyon that derives its name from the sediment full of dolomite rock that compose its sides. This canyon was formed by an alternating process of erosion and sedimentation, with periods of rapid erosion and long periods of sedimentation. Golden Canyon also reveals interesting geological formations. Red cliffs eroded by wind and rain stand tall. Death Valley reveals a beautiful palette of colors and sensations among a seemingly infinite stretch of land where time seems to stop. As the state capital, Madrid holds the majority of the country's political institutions, including the royal palace, the government headquarters, and the parliament. Also a city of art, its three main museums, the Prado, the Reina Sofia, and the Thyssen-Bornemisza, are called the Golden Triangle of Art and are among the most visited museums in the world. In the city, the Gran Via, or Great Road, is the most important avenue in the historic center. It brings together numerous cinemas, theaters, hotels, large stores, and banks, all in a neoclassical style. In 1886, the architect Carlos Velasco Peinado proposed a project for a Gran Via to the municipality, offering a wide variety of styles ranging from New York Art Deco to French Haussmannian. The Gran Via is considered a showcase of urban art, stretching from the Belle Époque of the 1920s and into the 1950s. The main square, or Plaza Mayor, is one of Madrid's much older squares. It was commissioned by Philip II, the founder of the capital, and built during the reign of the Emperor Philip III, his son. Surrounded by large balconies, including the Casa de la Panderia, or House of the Bakers, 237 balconies overlook it. The equestrian statue of Philip III, made by Jean Boulogne in 1616, stands in the center of the square. The northern edge of the square, the Bakery House, is a four-story building crowned with angular towers. The building, originally made of wood and dedicated to the production of bread, was built at the same time as the square by the same architect. The building burned several times, and in the end, it was rebuilt with stone. Today, its premises are occupied by the Tourism Office of Madrid. La Puerta del Sol, the Gate of the Sun, is one of the busiest and most well-known places in Madrid. Between the 17th and 19th centuries, the square became an important place for meeting others and gossiping. Here, all the information relative to the city and its inhabitants was exchanged. At its center, there's an equestrian statue of Charles III, who was a philanthropic philosopher king in the 18th century, the Age of Enlightenment. Even if it is a pedestrian zone today, this oval space is the zero point of all the roads in Spain. Much more ostentatious, the Royal Palace, located on Orient Square in the heart of the Spanish capital, is the official residence of the King of Spain. It is a palace with purely formal functions. King Philip VI and his family do not live there. The palace was built around 1750 and is one of the largest in all of Western Europe after the Louvre in France. It has over 2,800 rooms, 50 of which are open to the public. In addition, it was decorated by the greatest artists of the era, including Velázquez, El Greco, Pierre-Paul Rubens, Tiepolo, Mengs, Caravaggio, and Goya. Among the rooms that can be visited, the throne room is impressive with its frescoes by Mengs. The room has remained in the same state since the 18th century. The dining hall can hold up to 150 guests. And the royal bedroom, magnificently carpeted, has frescoes by Velázquez and paintings by Caravaggio and Goya. The decoration of the palace required that the greatest artists in Europe come to work on it, and it is truly a work of art on the same level as the Palace of Versailles in France. Orient Square, which faces the palace, encircles a carefully trimmed French formal garden, with sculptures of the first kings of Spain, which were originally supposed to be attached to the upper cornice of the palace. But they turned out to be too heavy, so they were moved here. Still in the historic center of the capital, the Palazzo de la Villa is one of its most well-preserved ensembles of monuments. It was home to one of the first core populations of medieval Madrid, and in its center there's a statue of the greatest admiral of the Spanish fleet in the 16th century, Álvaro de Bazan. On the side, the Cisneros house was built in the plateresque style, meaning that the stone was worked in the manner of a silversmith. To come to Madrid today is truly a very good surprise. With a very rich cultural heritage and a highly original way of life, the Spanish capital has many assets to seduce the discerning visitor. Suzhou is one of the oldest cities in China and now has more than 2 million inhabitants. From the 13th century, Suzhou was known as the capital of silk, of which it was the industrial center with its famous embroidery school. While the city has modernized, it has nonetheless retained an authentic character in its historic district, with its small streets bordered by traditional-style homes, and its small stalls and shops of all kinds. Built on the edge of a lake and the mouth of a river, the city has many canals, which have earned it the name, the Venice of the East. The two cities are also sister cities. Marco Polo said that Suzhou had more than 6,000 bridges to span them. That was certainly an exaggeration. These days, the city has around 160, and that many again in the outskirts. Visiting them is a joy, because they have no cars, no shops, just small boats that are used to get around, or for romantic promenades. The city of Suzhou has numerous famous gardens, 9 of which are on the UNESCO list of World Cultural Heritage Sites, because they are particularly representative of classical Chinese gardens. Their names are full of imagery, like the Garden of Simple Policy, the Couples Retreat Garden, the Retreat and Reflection Garden, the Garden of Harmony, the Master of the Nets Garden. Or like this one here, the Couples Garden Retreat, or the Couples Retreat Garden, is located near the end of the Old Town along the East Canal. Far from the massive tourist attractions that are the other gardens in the city, it is crossed several times by small, sinuous streams and has a unique charm due to its atmosphere and its environment. It contains numerous pavilions, and here too the zigzag bridges reign supreme. It stands out for the beauty of its trees, which, although few, embellish the path, and also for its magnolias and camellias. Originally, this was a private garden belonging to an official of the Qing dynasty. His apartments, now transformed into a museum, contain beautiful works of art from various Chinese dynasties. The Master of the Net's garden is one of the 4 most well-known gardens in the city. It was built in the 12th century, then long left abandoned, and it was restored in the 18th century. Despite the fact that this garden is small in size, hardly more than a hectare, it is an excellent representation of the style of Chinese gardens. It is divided into 3 distinct parts: a residential area, an interior garden with a courtyard and the garden itself, in which you can find a pond surrounded by pavilions, and kiosks that have magnificent mahogany furniture. As well as a beautiful ceramic collection. This garden also has rocks with original shapes. Created in 1044, the Great Wave Pavilion is the oldest garden in Suzhou. Unlike the other gardens that make up their landscapes based on stretches of water, the Great Wave Pavilion dedicates a large portion of its area to artificial hills. They are sprinkled with pavilions and galleries that snake through rocks and trees that captivate visitors with their exceptional charms. In one of the pavilions, 125 steles are exhibited, which are engraved with the portraits of 594 people relevant to Suzhou in the last 2,500 years. In Suzhou, the classical gardens are a veritable masterpiece of Chinese landscape design. Art, nature, and ideas blend harmoniously to create ensembles with a great beauty and harmony that exude serenity. Just like calligraphy and poetry, the art of the garden is one of the sacred arts of China. Located in the central part of Suzhou, the Confucian Temple was built in 1035 by the prefect of the city. It was both a training center for state officials and a temple. The main building contains a large number of inscriptions that show the thoughts of the philosopher, engraved on steels. Inside, there's a statue of the master, who lived around the year 500 BC. Confucius is the historical figure who left the greatest mark on Chinese civilization. He is considered the first educator of China, because he promoted values with the goal of harmonious human relations in order to live in a good society with similar people. Siena is an Italian city in Tuscany that has 55,000 inhabitants today. The city is famous for its artistic and architectural richness and is listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. As legend has it, Siena was founded by Senius and Aeschylus, the sons of Remus, who founded Rome with his brother Romulus. Senius and Aeschylus had to flee the ancient city on 2 horses, one black and one white, given to them by Apollo and Diana, in order to escape the fury of their uncle Romulus. They stopped here and founded the city of Siena. The white and black color of their horses then became the city's colors. In the 7th century, the city develops during the era of the Lombard kings, and having become a free and independent city, it becomes the great rival of Florence, whom it keeps at bay for a long time. This rivalry with the beautiful Florence can be seen in the richness of Siena's heritage. The building that is the most emblematic of the city of Siena is certainly the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Assumption, commonly known as the Duomo, the Dome. Perched on a hill, it dominates the historic center of the city. The Duomo is one of the most stunning churches in Italy. Characterized by its black, white, and red marble and stones, it was built between 1136 and 1382. The facade, made from designs by Giovanni Pisano, is composed of 3 portals and colonnades decorated with fine sculptures. The 3 golden mosaics of the 3 pinnacles are recent. They were assembled in Venice in 1878, after cartoons by Alessandro Fanci. The main one shows the coronation of the Virgin, and the one to the right, the Nativity. The cathedral is characteristic of the local art of the era. Built in 2 stages, it combines elements of the French Gothic style mixed with Tuscan Romanesque and classic architecture. The bronze central door was remade in the 20th century. Above it, there's a sun, also made of bronze. On the facade, the decorations and masterpieces abound, possibly to excess. On the upper level, the statuary is Gothic. The statues of patriarchs in the niches around the rose window are unattributed works. Almost all the statues that ornament the cathedral today are copies. The originals are preserved in the Museum of the Duomo. The sculptures on the ground floor are Romanesque. The characters amongst acanthus leaves represent prophets, philosophers, and apostles, and were created by Giovanni Pisano and his students. The nearly 90-meter-long nave is famous for its use of black and white marble. This horizontal division of black and white quite clearly recalls the city of Siena's coat of arms. The pillars, made of alternating bands, support semicircular arches, below which there are 171 busts representing the popes, the Christian virtues, the evangelists, and the prophets, all embellished with fine decorations. The interior of the Duomo truly gives the impression of a treasure. This impression is accentuated by the magnificent tiling, 3,000 square meters of pavements with 37 marble inlays that depict more than 60 biblical scenes and sibyls. In classical antiquity, a sibyl was a virgin blessed with prophetic powers. Here, the Greco-Roman sibyl created by Neroccio di Landi has an elegant silhouette. Her features are immersed in her head of hair, crowned with a diadem. At her feet, a wolf and a lion amicably share a paw. This is an allusion to a peace treaty signed between Siena and Florence. When you raise your head, you realize that the ceiling is also entirely decorated with marble inlay. Without a doubt, it was made first before that of the floor. Aside from the sibyls, another subject is organized around a vast circle that represents the Sienese she-wolf nursing the twins Senius and Aeschyus, the founders of the city. The scene is surrounded by the totemic animals of the 8 allied cities: the unicorn of Viterbo, the stork of Perugia, the lion of Florence, the hare of Pisa, the elephant of Rome, the horse of Arezzo, as well as the panther of Lucca and the goose of Orvieto. This group, whose creator is unknown, goes back to 1373. In the cross-section, the inspiration no longer comes from antiquity, but is related to themes taken from Hebrew history. They are great scenes, as much in their dimensions as their narrative richness, overflowing with characters. The first scene is the expulsion of Herod, a great scene created in 1485 by Benvenuto di Giovanni that recounts the expulsion of King Herod from Jerusalem, betrayed by his allies. He engages in one of his greatest battles to bring his family to safety. The center of the panel is occupied by a pitched battle, a theme that is quite rarely treated in Sienese painting. This work refers to Siena's dreams of power and greatness. At the time, it was the strongest state in Tuscany, and it both evokes and magnifies Siena's own combats through the battles carried out by the Hebrews. The glimpse of the city on the border of the mosaic recalls Siena and its ramparts. The theme of the Massacre of the Innocents was probably chosen because of its compatibility with the other scenes. Furthermore, it was related to current events elsewhere in Italy. Indeed, at the time of the creation of this part of the pavements, the south of Italy was in shock from the horrors of the invading Ottoman Muslims. So here you see the massacre of newborns following the announcement of the coming birth of Jesus, the future king of the Jews. Some have also noted that this representation also illustrates the glorious but traumatic end of Siena's independence. The San Giovanni Baptistry is one of the most sacred places in the cathedral. It is found beneath the choir. These baptismal fonts were made from marble, bronze, and enamel between 1417 and 1431 by the master sculptors of the era: Donatello, Lorenzo Ghiberti, Giovanni di Torino, and Goro de Norocchio. Ghiberti created this panel showing St. John the Baptist captured and brought before Herod. Donatello sculpted this virtue, incarnating forgiveness or trust. Next to it, another bronze by Lorenzo Ghiberti, representing the baptism of Christ. This other virtue symbolizes justice. The third bronze by Giovanni di Torino shows the birth of St. John the Baptist. It was Donatello who created this bronze, showing the presentation of the head of St. John the Baptist to Herod. The virtue that represents hope was also sculpted by the Florentine Renaissance master. If the Duomo is an architectural marvel, it is also filled to the brim with artistic treasures that show the power and richness attained by Siena, the great rival of Florence.